Welcome to the Brass and Woodwind Shop. I'm going to start taking apart this cornet to restore it. And if you have not watched the first part of this video, look for the link in the description below. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the bell from the cornet. Normally when I get dents out on bells, I do not take the bell off. But this one has a severe crease in it, like almost to the point where if I left it alone for much longer, the bell would probably break right off. So I'm going to unsolder the bell, and on cornets there are usually 4 solder joints that hold it on. 1, 2, and then 3 right in there, and then 4. Before I unsolder these braces, I need to remove the valves, and that's so that the valves don't get burned as I'm working on this. And also it's easier with the valves out of the way to get at these to heat them up. I'm going to pull the valves out, and I do believe that this one is stuck, so I'm going to use my soft jawed pliers to get that one undone. There are the valves. They're in pretty good shape for being 115 years old. This is a soft jaw pliers. It has harder rubber on it, and that does not damage the valve caps, but it gives you some leverage so that you can turn them. So I'm going to get that one out, and when you do this you have to be careful not to hit the threading on the other valves. So you just carefully do that. That one came right off. They're not always that easy, but this one was easy. So I'm going to pull up that valve, and I'm also going to pull off the bottom valve caps. Okay, this one is loose and it came right off. These ones are stuck, so I'm going to use the same tool for those. This tool does a very good job of pulling off the valve caps, but you just have to be careful not to do any damage to the other valve caps and the threading on the other valves as you use these. So when you go into the second one, instead of going like that, you're going to do it at a little bit of an angle. And be careful not to hit the threading, and be careful to avoid the threading on the other one too. And just turn it a little bit, and that one also came off very easily. A little bit more about these pliers. These are actually made for plumbing, but we use them in band instrument repair also. And I'm going to leave a link in the description below where you can get these. Now it's time to unsolder the bell. For soldering, I usually use my wooden assembly mandrels, and what you do is chuck that in the vise and put the bell on to the mandrel. The problem is this one runs into the dent before it holds on there, so if I did that, the cornet would probably fall off and be damaged. So I'm going to use my trombone assembly mandrel for this one, and it will hold in there, and then I can have this out in the open and I can work at it easily without having things in the way. And also, since I'm going to be using a torch, it keeps the instrument out in the open so that I don't burn anything. Everybody who comes into my shop finds these very interesting, and they always ask what the table legs are doing on my pegboard. I also have another larger one that's used for baritones and saxophones. You can look in the description below for a link to the playlist on soldering. Here's how I have the cornet set up so that I can work on it easily. I have the torch going. I'm going to heat up these joints, and I have the camera right over my shoulder so I can look over my shoulder while I work. And these two joints have to be heated up together because they both need to come off in order for this to come apart. There we go. And I'm moving this so that when the solder hardens, it does not stick back to there. And there, it should be hardened by now. It usually only takes a couple seconds for that solder to harden. The way you do it is when you get up to 450 degrees, this pops off. And then if you keep it like that, then when it cools back down to colder than 450 degrees, the solder will be hard, and then you can touch it without it sticking back together. If it's over 450 and the solder is melted and you have it together, then it will stick back in that position. So that's why you want to make sure there's space in between it. But I also have to be careful not to bend the bell again, because if that bends too many more times, it's going to break. Now I'm going to take the cornet and turn it, and I have to get this brace unsoldered and then the ferrule unsoldered, and then this will come apart. I'm going to put my hand over here so that I don't burn myself, and I'm going to unsolder these two joints together. And sometimes you can unsolder them one at a time. Other times you need to do two at the same time. And there it is, it's all apart. And now I'm going to clean up all the solder off the 4 solder joints. You do that with what is called the heat and wipe method. You heat the solder joint until it's melted, and then you wipe it off, and you use a rag to do that. You make sure that it's at least 2 layers thick, and then you wrap it around your finger like that, and then you heat it up, and you can tell when it's melted because you can see it melt, and then as soon as it melts you take the flame away from it and you wipe it off. I have the flame right here. I'm going to put it on there and watch for it to melt, and then wipe it off. And then I'm also moving the rag as I do this, because if you get solder on the rag and then you heat it up and put the rag back on there, you can just move the solder around. So this way you clean the solder off. And then when all the solder is off, you do the next joint. You also have to be careful when you're doing this where the solder is going. If you're in the shop with someone else, you probably want the person to move so that they don't get hot solder onto them. There, now that's all done. You can also see that the heat melted some of the spray paint and that smeared around. I will take the spray paint off at a later time. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm also going to clean up these solder joints, and usually you don't need to leave the fire on there very long. If the metal is thinner, it takes even less time. And you heat it up to 450, and then you wipe it off. Thank you for watching. Next week I plan on stripping the paint off of the instrument and pulling the tuning slides, and I'll see if I have time for anything else after I get that done. Look in the description below for links to other videos that are related to the repairs that I did on the instrument today.